Today on RoxomTV News, Iran's death toll is rising as a nationwide internet blackout drags on, cutting millions off from the outside world. Plus, Bill Clinton could be held in contempt for not testifying about Jeffrey Epstein. But first, Denmark and Greenland meet with the United States today as Americans remain deeply divided over whether the U.S. should even be talking about owning Greenland. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's get into it. Happy Wednesday and welcome back to another edition here at RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. We're starting with our top stories this morning, and our first one starts with Denmark and Greenland, who are set to confront the Trump administration directly this week as their foreign ministers meet with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, following weeks of escalating rhetoric from President Donald Trump. Now, at the center of this dispute is Greenland, a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark and part of NATO's geopolitical sphere. Trump has repeatedly argued that Greenland is vital to U.S. national security. He has said that the United States must own it to prevent Russia or China from gaining influence in the Arctic. Now, Danish and Greenlandic officials are hoping the meetings with the U.S. will cool down as the situation has become increasingly tense and unpredictable. Now, behind the scenes, however, there is real concern that this could turn into a public confrontation rather than a private negotiation. In recent days, Greenland's leadership has sharpened its message. Greenland's prime minister said this week, if we have to choose between the USA and Denmark here and now, we choose Denmark. We choose NATO, the Kingdom of Denmark, and the European Union. Trump, however, dismissed those statements outright. Listen to what he told reporters.
That's their problem. I disagree with him. I don't know who he is, don't know anything about him, but that's going to be a big problem for him.
Do you want to see democracy in Iran?
Ideally, you'd like to see it, but what we want to see is we don't want to see people killed, and we want to see a little bit of freedom for these people. These people have been living in hell for a long time. That used to be a hell of a country. I have friends that used to invest in Iran, and they did well with their investments. It was a great place. The people were great. Even the leadership was good. And now it's living in hell.
Then this morning, before Denmark and Greenland even arrived at the White House, Trump repeated his position publicly, saying that the only answer was for Greenland to be in the hands of the United States. Meanwhile, Greenlanders themselves have been voicing growing concern about the United States' interest in their land. Let's take a listen.
Donald Trump says he has to have it. What's the message from Greenlanders to him?
I would like to encourage to use you both ear wisely and speak less. We are not for sale.
He cannot take our country, it's our. We need to get and stand together and fight for it.
What's your message to the US?
We don't want to be a part of US and they should leave us alone.
What no one knows, of course, is how the Trump administration is planning to handle today's meeting, confrontation or compromise. Everyone here is waiting anxiously to find out.
Now, for many of them, this is not an abstract geopolitical debate. It is about identity, autonomy, and whether their future is being discussed in rooms where they have little control. U.S. officials, meanwhile, have reportedly discussed options ranging from financial inducements to more coercive measures, including the potential use of military force. Now, those remarks have alarmed European allies who stress that borders cannot be changed through pressure or intimidation. They also emphasize that Arctic security must be handled within NATO, not through unilateral action. Because once you start normalizing territorial pressure among allies, the rules of the post-World War II order begin to fray very quickly. And this is where this story widens, because while this drama is unfolding internationally, it is colliding with domestic opinion inside of the United States. You see, a new Reuters Ipsos poll shows that only 17% of Americans support Trump's efforts to acquire Greenland. Now that means that more than 4 out of 5 Americans either oppose the idea or are currently unsure. Now the poll found that large majorities of both Democrats and Republicans oppose using military force to annex the island. Only 4% of Americans said using military force would be a good idea. 71% said it would be a bad idea, while 66% of respondents said they worry Trump's push could damage relationships with European allies. Denmark has already warned that any use of force against Greenland would effectively end NATO as it currently exists. So, I want to give you my take on this story really quick here, because this is not really about Greenland, right? It is about what kind of world we are trying to live in and what kinds of rules we think still matter. Now, the moment you start talking seriously about acquiring territory in the 21st century, you are reopening doors that took generations to close. Yes, the Arctic matters. Yes, minerals matter. And yes, China and Russia both matter. But so do rules, so do alliances, and so does the idea that sovereignty is not a suggestion. Now, if the United States wants more influence in the Arctic, there are already systems built for that. They are called diplomacy, alliances, and coordination. Not pressure, not threats, and not ownership. What really stands out to me here is the polling. You see, 17% of Americans support this. That is not a mandate. That, my friends, is a warning light, because when foreign policy starts outrunning public consent, it stops being strategy and it starts becoming improvisation. And improvisation with borders has a long and messy history. Greenland is not a chess piece, Denmark is not a speed bump, and NATO is not a branding exercise. It is a system, and systems only work when people believe in them. And the moment that belief weakens, everyone starts hedging their bets. And when allies start hedging, power becomes less stable and more volatile. Now, this is not about who owns what, it's about whether rules still mean something when they become inconvenient. Because if the strongest country in the world stops treating rules as real, everyone else eventually follows. And that is when the map stops being boring, which can sound exciting until you remember why boring maps were invented in the first place. All right, joining us this morning to help us connect the dots, the man that does it better than anyone else, Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, happy Wednesday. Thank you, as always, for joining us. What's your initial beat on this news regarding Greenland in the United States?
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of yours, in the sense that, you have all the right pieces. This is about the World War II consensus. You can understand this scenario through following these systems and understanding where these systems go. I'll say, to start off, the 17% number is probably 17% greater than it was last year. So it's already grown by 17% in a year. I think the number of people that would have said last year that America should acquire Greenland were 0. And we're at 17% now. And even there, you saw Trump's persuasion, right? Trump first said Greenland last year as he was about to be inaugurated. Then it was Panama. Then it was Canada. Now go back to your mindset when it first started. When he first said Greenland, everybody laughed. That's when it would have been about 0, right? And everyone went, oh, come on. And then he said Panama. And then he said Canada. And suddenly the trajectory of all that had people in their own minds saying, well, Greenland wasn't so stupid compared to Canada. Now Trump's really gone and said something stupid. Canada. So when you look at it like that, the persuasion is already in. Now, I don't believe any BBC fake news going around polling people. They do that in Canada every day. They go to Canadian border towns and they'll say, oh, Canadians, are you traveling to the United States? And they'll get, 10 people who say, I don't go to the United States anymore. I'm afraid. But that's not really what's going on. So they try these same stories that you just saw the BBC poll. That happens in Canada every day. You can go over there. I think Nick Shirley went over to Greenland a while ago and has a bunch of kids saying, we would love to be part of the United States. So you can fake all these polls or you can manipulate all these polls. I just don't believe them because they're financial incentives. But going back to the systems, here's a funny way to predict this. Greenland, just yesterday, the Chinese brought this up because they thought it was funny. The Chinese have this propaganda guy, Shay, something like that. He's just a troll on Twitter, but he's really good at what he does, trolling America and all that. But he pointed out the hilarity that Congress actually just got a notice that Greenland was buying a stockpile of U.S. missiles. So while they're negotiating,
okay.
and they're going to buy 100 of these Hellfire something missiles. So the Chinese guy just brought it up to say, like, look, whatever you're hearing, there's a bunch of bullshit going on underneath it all. Indeed, yes, systems are changing. NATO, all of it is changing. If you go and look at the tiff that we had with England just last week with X and the threats that we're going to ban X and fine X, there's something like 14,000 arrests for online stuff in the UK, American companies being targeted. You've even got the hypocrisy of NATO and NATO countries are giving Russia, spending more money on Russian oil than they are giving to Ukraine to fight the war. Even going over to China right now and asking China for all kinds of commercial arrangements because China's looking for new partners because of Venezuela. Even that doesn't make sense because China is, of course, supporting the war on the Russian side in Ukraine. So none of it makes sense. All of it looks like cross purposes, misaligned incentives. And we're entering a world where we are building new systems, and whether or not they have the same sense of sovereignty as before, I think you're going to see more and more inducements from the Trump administration. It's not going to be what it is today. Whatever goes on between the factions that are in charge of Greenland, it's a coalition government in Greenland right now. So the person speaking for the government isn't necessarily speaking for the political parties that might be in control soon because it's not a majority government, so they might have to go back to elections. They're probably definitely going to have a referendum on the island to decide this one day. So there will be some aspect of democracy. And, I continue to see this as Trump and American officials have decided on this. They're going to get it one way or the other. I don't think it's ever going to get to that. That's just Trump negotiating. But the framework shows they're willing to go all the way. We'll see if the other side is willing to go far in negotiations. I expect huge incentives to come from the Americans until the point at which the referendum is more or less understood for a win. Now, everything you said about changing systems, I agree, in the sense that this is very risky. We built these systems for a reason, for peace, but the problem with them is they didn't actually produce peace. They produced a time of peace, but when you look at the coordination, the changing aspects of power in the world, the changing dynamics, we're in a new world. This isn't World War II anymore. Allies are changing. America's allies look much more like Dubai or UAE, Saudi Arabia, Japan, South Korea, far less England and France and all these folks. And France, by the way, already saying NATO is over, right? France already threatening to leave. France was out of NATO before and is willing to now go out again if America keeps this up. So you're seeing all kinds of things change. And it looks like the pro-Trump factions in Europe itself are on the ascension. It's not just Italy. You're going to see it in Germany. You're going to see it in Holland. You're going to see it in France. You're probably going to see a Nigel Farage prime ministership in the UK. So you have a whole wave of change coming to the UK, which suggests that the World War II consensus is over.
I mean, you make a lot of good points, though, but I will say with regards to the 17%, I don't think that's necessarily right off the jump indicative of there could be growing support, because it's one of those things that I don't think any, like, John Q. Public's even thinking about, and then they hear, like, oh, that's a possibility, and there are Trump loyalists out there that will literally say, will do anything he says because he said it. So I will be curious to see how that number changes in the upcoming weeks and months, and then I would think we might have a better idea from there on. And, this story really isn't just about Greenland, right? People are tuning in because this is really about, well, it's being framed that way, U.S. national security, or you can make the argument, is this about more influence and power in the Arctic as climate change makes the region itself more valuable? Where do you land on that?
I mean, if we're gonna try to understand Trump's motivations and his way of thinking, it wouldn't be the global warming angle, because he doesn't calculate that into his perception, right? It's a hoax to him. So
fair.
I don't think that would be one of the motivating factors. Now, there are boats there. There are things happening. I think it's really more about America just literally growing. America's either shrinking. Any country is either shrinking or it's growing. Under Joe Biden, America had a kind of malaise, right? We heard Jimmy Carter, when he was president, mention the same thing. There's a malaise. And then you had Reagan come around with It's Morning in America, even embracing Make America Great Again before Trump even went there, right? That was a Reagan
Right.
slogan back in his time. Trump is all about growing America. That's why he's always saying it's the hottest country in the world. It's the hottest country in the world. We went from being dead, we were nothing, and now we're hot. And it's true. You're either shrinking or you're growing. And it looks like he's just trying to grow it, and he'll push in any direction, including Canada, to grow the country, which is why he's been consistent over the years saying things like Panama. Now you have Cuba. It looks like Cuba. I mean, what's going on over there? Trump looks adamant over there as well. You've also got the same resurgence of Trumpism in South America. Chile just chose a Trump-aligned government. That aligns with Argentina as well. So you've got Chile, Argentina. Trump is talking with the Colombian guy. He's already changed his tune. Venezuela is America now. So I think you're going to still see this growth. I think it just has to do with growth or not. I don't think it's so much taster's choices. I want Greenland for all these reasons. It's, oh, I can grow there. Okay, that looks like the least amount of obstacles. We got to grow. And so, but this is also, let's remember, this is what America does every time it goes through one of these world wars. This is a natural occurrence to America. I predicted it before any of this Trump stuff. I had said it many times in my show, not because I thought it myself, it's because it's in the fourth turning framework, the famous fourth turning book that a lot of people use to understand the times we're living in. When America goes, and the fourth turning very much about American history. It's an American book about American history blocks, they call them, these cycles, these 80-year cycles. You can see it right away. America, of course, grew after the Civil War. It grew for the reasons we understood it grew, right? It was the growing of America that caused the war, of course, because it was whether or not the new states being admitted could choose to have slavery or not, which was really how the whole thing got fired up. It was what happens, how you grow America. America grew again after World War II in ways that were both transparent and opaque. They absorbed places like Europe, like NATO, like Germany, right? Germany's still guarded by America. You get Japan and Korea in the mix as well there. They became versions of American imperialism, which was not the same model used before. Just like this model of imperialism will not be like the one we saw previous. This is going to be something different. In fact, I predict, the reason I predict that the actual language to describe America, in all of these history blocks, it went from the United States are, which is what you'd say about America before the Civil War, because of the states being sovereign entities. And then that moved to the United States is, and then it became the Fed is. I think we're going back to the United States are, because the admission, when Trump really starts negotiating with, say, Alberta in Canada, if he can break Canada apart, he's going to make a sweet deal to Alberta. And the way I've always predicted that sweet deal, you're going to get a state like, it's going to be better than an American state. They're going to have less federal oversight. In the same way that Puerto Rico enjoys tax-free status, they're going to induce places like Greenland and Alberta in such a way that you're going to get a state like Texas go, what about me? What do you mean they get that shit?
Yeah.
I want that shit right now, boy. And that's American stuff. You're going to see that all over. So you're going to get, with whatever Trump ends up giving away to these states in terms of increased sovereignty from Washington, D.C., I think he's going to have to do that. I think he's going to have to give them separate side deals in order to induce them, but he's willing to do that because, he's trying to make a deal. I think whatever those deals are, they're going to actually awaken U.S. state sovereignty to the point that we won't describe the United States in the future as a singular unit. I think our language will become plural. I think we're going back to the United States are, because the increased sovereignty that's going to be negotiated to these places, and that will then be demanded as individual U.S. states reawaken to their sovereignty. So this is an exercise in bringing sovereignty closer to the individual. It is part of the process of moving towards a sovereign individual state. Another great book, another great predictive framework book. And a book that, by the way, predicts in the 1990s that Canada will be the first country to break apart and balkanize in this way, that Canada will be the first of these fiat countries to liquidate itself and become something else. And so, I think America will absorb that energy, will find a way to make place for it. But it's a bit like, I think I've said this to you on the show before. It's like what I predict with China and Hong Kong and Taiwan. They'll get Taiwan just like they got Hong Kong. But it's like the end of the Matrix movie. Remember how Neo finally realizes how to win against the agent? It's to let himself be absorbed. Right. And when he's absorbed, it's a choke on the bone situation, right? China is going to swallow Taiwan. They're going to choke on the bone. There'll be something different going forward. I think America does grow because of Trump. And in a way, it won't be quite, you won't characterize it as choke on the bone, but America will be different at the end of this at its heart. It will change America as much as it will change these places. So I understand the risks and worries. And there are many Trump supporters who don't want anything to do with Greenland, by the way, right? I agree. Most of the Trump supporters, are a great number of Trump supporters, can be prompt engineered by whatever he says, but there are many out there who say, no, don't do it. This is a side quest, stop the side quest, America first, blah, blah, blah. So he's got people saying that, which is why I think he's going to have to reach into his bag of tricks and go hard on the persuasion, which is why he's going to have to give them a sweet deal. And it's actually going to change America in the end domestically.
Yeah, interesting take. And, I'm a little concerned, though, about the United States is either growing or it's like kind of a dying. It's a very like capitalist business mentality, which I guess shouldn't be that surprising from a guy like Donald Trump, who's a businessman first. So I can understand that. But when pretty much most of the world's territory seems to have been claimed, unlike, the Manifest Destiny days of the United States, I get a little worried about what the repercussions will be on the world stage. And also, it's interesting to hear your take on how this domino of Greenland could actually have repercussions that echo far into the United States themselves. And I'll be really curious to see if that plays out in the way that you think that it might. And it very well could. It sounds like you've been spot on so far, so I'll be curious to see how that goes. But we're going to move on to our next story here that's happening in Washington as Republicans in the House Oversight Committee say they are preparing to hold former President Bill Clinton in contempt. Now, the move comes after Clinton declined to appear for testimony in an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the committee chairman, James Comer, is also warning that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton could face similar action if she does not comply with a separate subpoena. Lawyers for the Clintons have pushed back, calling the subpoenas unenforceable. They argue the requests lack a valid legislative purpose and say the former president has already provided all the relevant information he possesses. Clinton has denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes and has never been accused of wrongdoing by any of Epstein's victims. Now, this escalation follows the Justice Department's highly redacted release of photographs and records related to Epstein after Congress passed legislation requiring greater disclosure of investigative materials. Some of those images show Bill Clinton with Epstein in the early 2000s, including at Epstein's properties and on trips taken before Epstein's sex trafficking charges became public. Clinton's office has emphasized that the photos are decades old and says he cut ties with Epstein before any criminal conduct was known. Now, for those of you watching at home, this matters because it tests the limits of congressional power. It raises questions about how far lawmakers can go in pursuing testimony from former presidents. And it also highlights how unresolved the Epstein case remains even years after his death. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, really quick here, what does it actually mean to be held in contempt of Congress, and how serious is that in real world terms?
I think this is being used as sort of more Trump theater. I've even heard Trump sort of quasi-defend Bill Clinton on this file in a way. I think what this is about, though, from the very beginning was Trump doing his kayfabe thing. He's sucking people in to want answers, to want people to get involved in process, to force them, a forcing function kind of, to talk about this in ways that they don't want to. They were hoping for a long time that Trump was the target of it. You saw everything come out on December 19th and then December 23rd. You haven't heard one word of it in the news since December 23rd. It's been sort of lost in all the other news. Bringing this back now, the subpoenas, right? There'll be a bunch of MAGA people who will say, well, Steve Bannon went to jail for exactly this, which is true. Technically, they have these powers, but these are all kangaroo courts. The congressional courts have never really been true adjudicative courts. It's kind of like grand juries. Whenever they say, Like I even saw that when they wanted all the grand jury testimony to come out around Epstein, that was like relevant evidence, right? The truth about grand juries it's the stupidest evidence and the lowest credibility evidence you can ever find, because it's just accusations. It's a collection of accusations. It's never the other side of the story ever. That's what grand jury stuff is. It's not real evidence. It's just a collection of people whining and complaining. And congressional things are kind of the same. They're not really adjudicative. Now, there are legal powers. There is a constable, right? There's a police officer of Congress. They have the right, to call you to the bar, to subpoena. It's the one jailable power they have. They usually have a prison, right, or a jail cell right in Congress for this reason, because they do technically have this subpoena power, and that these are quasi-judicial courts that only apply to their own members. So they can't haul any civilian, in front. They have to have some connection to the government or some role or some spot. But they haven't been exercised. You're going to hear a lot of Trump folks say, "Oh, Steve Bannon got in." True, but the fact is these congressional courts have the lowest credibility, like a grand jury. They're not really designed for justice or anything like that, or for a real deliberative process. They're really designed for theater. This is theater, just like Steve Bannon's prison was real. Like, I'm not taking it away from Steve Bannon, right? He really went to prison for this. But how much of that was theater, how much of that was, willful? He probably could have fought it, all these things. It turned into a big dramatic turn during the election, that he had to go to prison on July 4th, and he got out just before the election. And then, it was a whole movie unto itself, the Steve Bannon saga of jail. So I would say, just as a general rule, these courts, like grand juries, they don't offer credible platforms. The power to imprison is there, but I think the process is the goal. The process is the conversation. It is the debate. It is the theater itself, and beyond any like legal responsibility or anything like that.
Yeah. And with this idea of it being theater, Clinton's lawyers are saying that these subpoenas are unenforceable. So is that kind of what this ties into? Like they're just putting this out there, but it isn't enforceable? Is that kind of the theater part of it? Or are the Clintons are just using this kind of, is that what's going on?
Yeah, Steve Bannon had to submit to, they can't send, my understanding, so I could be, you can fully fact check me on this, but my understanding of the legal powers of being called to that bar, which is literally a bar, right? So you can call people to that bar just like you can call people to the bar, because there's like a threshold where civilians can't walk, where only elected officials can walk in these rooms, and that's how they do these subpoenas. They bring you to the civilian sort of witness stand in the chamber, and that's the bar. The bar is the thing you can't cross, just like the bar is where you can't go to the judge. But my understanding is the constable of Congress doesn't have extraterritorial rights. He doesn't have jurisdiction in like New York. So if Steve Bannon would have stayed in New York, I don't think, that's what they say, unenforceable. They can't go in. It's not like they can't send the Maduro team on a congressional subpoena, right? The ones who went and got Maduro, that doesn't work. That's not a thing. It's as long as, if Bill Clinton would come to Congress and the subpoena was actionable, I believe then, yes, that the constable, or whatever they call him, the commander, he's got some, police rank, not military rank. He's got a police rank.
Yeah.
That police officer would indeed be able to arrest Clinton for contempt of Congress on the grounds of Congress, not if he's just at his house in Brooklyn or Harlem or wherever he lives, or upstate New York. That's why it's unenforceable. It's the physical jurisdiction of that police officer is limited to the campus and the Washington Mall and the federal apparatus inside of DC. They can't go out and arrest someone in Richmond. They can't in Virginia. They can't go to Florida. They can't go to New York. It's just there. So that's why I said the Steve Bannon thing might have been a bit of theater, because, Steve Bannon willfully submitted to being arrested. As I understand, he could have just chilled and never gone to jail, but there's theater involved. So he's in jail, and now they have an argument, and this and that. So, but it was real. They went that far, and they did jail Steve Bannon. So he really did go to jail, and he probably was uncomfortable, and it probably sucked. But there's a part of willful engagement for the purposes of theater to it. If I'm to give myself a bit of a mind reading ability here.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to move on from the political theater to the box office next, Nolan, because Netflix is now considering a move that could reshape the entire entertainment industry. You see, the streamer is exploring an all-cash takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. And according to Bloomberg, the company is weighing a major change to its proposal, dropping stock from the deal entirely and replacing it with straight cash. The original agreement included a mix of cash and Netflix shares, but Netflix stock has fallen sharply since October, making that structure less appealing to Warner shareholders and more politically sensitive. An all-cash offer could simplify the deal and speed things up. It could also escalate the fight. You see, rival bidder Paramount Skydance has launched an aggressive counteroffensive, including lawsuits, a tender offer, and plans to replace board members to block Netflix's bid. After news of Netflix's possible shift broke, Warner Brothers shares jumped, signaling investor optimism that a cleaner structure could break the deadlock. Netflix has already lined up roughly $59 billion in bridge financing from Wall Street banks, so the money is there. The real question is how much debt Netflix wants to take on and how much regulatory scrutiny it is willing to absorb. Because an all-cash mega deal would instantly raise red flags in Washington. You see, lawmakers from both parties have been warning about excessive consolidation in the media and streaming industries. They argue that fewer companies controlling more content could hurt competition, creators, and consumers. For viewers at home, this matters because this deal could reshape how entertainment is made, distributed, and priced. Who controls the biggest franchises, which platforms survive, and how much choice consumers actually have. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, what's your first initial thoughts on this potential cash offering here from Netflix?
Well, I'll go into the reasonings for a second, because that was the first thing that I had, the worry about the centralization, overly centralized media. You know, what it brings me back to is something I learned about the early 1900s mayoral race in New York City. The number one issue of that campaign, they were all debating it. It was, oh my God, what are we going to do with all the horse shit? There's so many horses moving to New York City with all the people and all the carriages that the horse shit is just lining up. It's just getting so deep. It's an existential problem. Like, it was the main issue of the 1900s, right at the turn of the century, mayoral candidacy for New York. How do we clean it? How do we deal with it? How do we manage it? Little did they know that within 10 years, the only horses left would be the ones that you can still ride today on the calèches in Grand Central or in Central Park for tourists, because cars were invented and there was never going to be another horse ever again on the streets in New York City. And I bring up all of this because when I hear them worrying about centralization in media, you know, just in the past couple of weeks, I've become a major consumer of the online AI revitalization of the Star Wars franchise. Star Wars videos now are at the leading edge of turning the tooling that we're getting from AI into actual stories. And you've already seen Disney actually say publicly they're going to be lining with fan-created content for this reason. The stuff is actually getting really good. And, you know, there's still some of the tells, like, you know, recycled video, 4-second loops, the phase in and phase out, little things they're doing to keep character consistency. But you're seeing the rate of change and the progress go further and further and further. It doesn't look like they've come to any plateau. The videos are getting actually really entertaining, really engaging. They're at about maximum 8 or 9 minutes right now, but the 8 or 9 minute ones that are really a cut above are gathering a lot of steam, a lot of attention. And so when I see there's all these considerations and worries about how you're going to manage the over centralization of content, and when I see, you know, the publisher model isn't really satisfying our needs anyway. They're producing a lot of stuff on Netflix, but engagement with these shows has never been lower. If you look at the top 10 movies of 2025, I mean, the box office is quite garbage compared to normal. You're not really seeing runaway hits. You know, Superman was less popular than the Zack Snyder Superman. Maybe made money, but was not a cultural sensation. Jurassic Park was the biggest winner, and it was kind of not great. Like, it was pretty much, I've seen the whole movie. Oh my God, guess what? Kids running away from dinosaurs. Nothing was new. It's all derivative. Even if you look at what the publishers are doing, it's all a live remake, a part 2, a part 3. You're just not seeing the creativity that is actually out there. And so when I see these tools, what I see is a huge wave of a renaissance in content that's just under the surface, that's just waiting. In the same way that publishers are these fraudulent third-party actors that aren't producing any new content, I think of them as a Bitcoiner might think of banks, and how we can disintermediate these folks. Now, they're not dead overnight. There's a time that they can survive. They might have a few really big wins. There might even be a kind of weird renaissance of the old studio model for a while, just like we might see a renaissance of the banking model on the free banking and stablecoin models. You might actually see that, right, for a little while as we go in this liminal transitory phase. But the signs of decentralized media and the signs of new production studios coming are obvious. There's going to be someone who harnesses this and captures it and really, really drives home super entertainment that people love, because the demand is there. We're sick of I just want to go to the movies. I can't. There's nothing to see. There's nothing good. I just want to put a TV show on. I just don't find anything. We're not in the golden age of television right now. That already passed. But we could be back in the golden age, just like we're in innovating in all kinds of other fields. It looks like we're going to be in the golden age of transportation pretty soon, with all the innovations of self-driving cars and batteries and all that stuff. The golden age of consumer electronics with the robots. So you can imagine that the golden age of art and culture is there, because truthfully, telling stories is one of the things AI will just never be able to do, simply because, and I'll bring a Scott Adams frame in here, right? His user interface for reality suggests that the mating instinct is a big part of our reality, and AI just, part of creating content, part of being in a musical band, being an actor, is mating. You want to show off. We all want to show off.
Chicks.
Get chicks. It's all the get chicks thing. Yeah. So, human art will always be valued because it is a mating, part of the mating ritual. It is part of being a peacock, showing off your attractiveness, attracting a partner. Even when you're past the attracting age, it's still sort of hardwired into our magnetism and our attractions. So what I do imagine is that we are more likely to see a renaissance in art, and this whole Warner Brothers, Netflix, is exactly like the 1900 mayoral race in New York City. What about the horse shit? Can you believe it? What are we going to do about the horse shit? All right. Mamdani didn't have to talk about horse shit when he became the mayor of New York. He had to talk about affordability because that's the subject of the time. No one cares about the horses anymore. And so I think the same change will come to content and entertainment.
Yeah. Boy, how far we've come, right? From the biggest issues being horse shit up to our ankles in the streets, and now it's just bad box office bombs. So at least we're making progress here.
It's better. Progress.
But it does beg a question here, Nolan, that I'd love to get your thoughts on. Do you feel like this kind of mega merger is kind of the natural end game of the streaming business model, or is it maybe a sign that the model itself is under stress and maybe even broken?
It could be. It'll depend on how sincere. The way to tell that is to see how sincere they are in keeping the feature-length films released in cinemas as a part of the business plan. So, for example, what you saw this summer with a Superman movie, I think it went out of theaters or was available online on HBO within about 3 weeks. And that's not a good sign for things going forward, right? That says that it was more worth it for them to pump the Suicide Squad show because there was a tie-in with Superman and John Cena or something like that, and they needed to pump that show, so they had to get it in there because it was sort of required viewing if you wanted to be able to watch their feature-length show, which was never released in cinemas. So, but there was a movie version of it before, of course. So what you see there from that formula is that even Warner Brothers is not holding on to the cinema cards that protectively. How much are they trying to get Netflix to really sign on the dotted line to guarantee X amount of movies coming in the cinema? Paramount, we understood that was the end game. There was no way around it. Paramount is out on its own. If they don't have feature-length IP, feature-length film cinema released IP, they're probably toast because the cinema model won't make it. So, cinemas went from being almost a religious experience in whatever our culture was before the internet You went into the theater, you went in once a week, you came out with a break, a laugh, a refreshed mindset. It really had a sort of, it brought us all together. We all talked about the same blockbusters. We all talked word of mouth and spread the news about whether this movie was good. I can still remember one of my friends giving me shit for telling me to go to the other guys because I thought it was funny. And he's like, we went and saw it, it was terrible. And he was mad at me. And I was like, how did you think that movie was? That was so good.
Mad at you.
It was very, yeah, like I hated it, so but that was normal. I haven't really experienced that since then. Like you gave me a bad movie, not, wasn't going to end our friendship, but it was just the way friends got along for generations. And maybe it is gone. I mean, there is a chance it was part of a time and a place. I tend to think there is something salvageable there if the stories are engaging, if the stories do cause you to tell your friend, go see this movie. We just haven't had enough of them. And Jurassic Park 1 million isn't going to do it. And another superhero movie isn't going to do it. I go back to the 90s, and when you look at, the 4 movies that would be released on a Thursday night, I'd take any of the 4 on any week in 1999 as better than any movie made today. And that's, an indictment of the business economics and the incentives. If they can figure out, like, to me, if they can do what the Japanese did with that Godzilla movie, Godzilla Zero or whatever it was called, and it cost about 15 million to make. It was a hit in America. It was a hit in theaters. That you've got to get movies like Captain America, New World Order, Brave New World, $500 million for that dog shit, for that stupid derivative sequel to the Hulk without Captain America, called Captain America, no good. No one wanted to see it. And you had to watch the Hulk to understand, it just was dumb. And so, I think there is room there, and Godzilla and the AI tools and the independent studios, the decentralization of the model is probably the only chance we have to revitalize. If not, it is going to go streaming. But I agree. Your original question is streaming on the ropes. I do think people want to go to the movies. The movies just aren't good. Streaming would have trouble or would have a challenger at least, if the social aspect of movies came back and it was just what kids did, what every teenage kid did on a Friday night was go to the movies again.
Part of me thinks, though, I have to wonder out loud. I mean, we're maybe out of the golden age of television. For me, that was maybe like 10 years ago. It's like everything that was on were absolute bangers. You had like Mad Men and Breaking Bad, et cetera, et cetera. But part of me thinks that maybe this is an indictment on the cinema kind of system itself. We haven't really seen a ton of progress other than like 3D goggles via Avatar. And I have a 65-inch TV at home. I can sit on my couch. I don't got to pay $12 for a popcorn. And I think it's maybe we're just not incentivizing people enough to see these. Yeah, maybe the content isn't where we want it to be. But like, if I'm going to the cinema outside of a giant screen, I should be smelling the smells of that world. I should be feeling the wind in Twister blowing in my hair. That's an experience. But my experience at home is too close to what a cinema experience is right now, and I don't have people talking behind me. I'm not paying for that expensive popcorn. I can pause it and go to the bathroom when I want. So to me, it's like, yeah, the content could be better, but I'd like to see the cinematic experience itself really be revamped, because those lay down beds and ordering food just aren't doing it enough for me personally. But we'll see how it goes. I'll be curious. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, gang, but go ahead. One more? Yeah.
Let me just add one point to that. I think you're totally right. And I think the live, I get what you're saying about sitting and the smells. I think it might go one step further. I think that with the business model of universities and education collapsing, I could totally see Hollywood turning itself into like a visual experience where the movie of the Civil War comes out, or the movie of the Meiji Restoration in Japan comes out, and you actually have Tom Cruise as the last samurai, like experiencing the history with you, and you're actually a character in a kind of holodeck version. So I don't know if the passive thing is there, but I saw this really brilliant plan on how to revitalize LA recently. And it was all that. It was about embracing live events. It was embracing real in-person experiences and using the actors to do that. And inevitably, somewhere along the way, I think history, education, sending your kids to school, just like sending your kids to the movies, like things are being done inside the house, the books are in the air. There is a world where school and Hollywood budgets and special effects all merge into one, and you experience the movie as a participant. And I would go if Tom Cruise came out with a 4-hour version of walking through Tokyo in the Meiji Restoration, and he's the last samurai, and he films it once, and then you just get to go on the adventure with him. I'm pretty sure I'd do that, right? I'd get chased. All of a sudden, the Jurassic Park dinosaurs are fun again, and it's not me watching kids getting chased. I'm getting chased, and so I see what you're saying, and I agree, and I think it is headed that way. And I think it's the history business model collapsing into the Hollywood model and giving us some new way of learning and experiencing the world.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And, you know, I think there are other ways to do storytelling that are really only limited by people's imaginations, and there's a lot to unlock there, and hopefully we'll get there at some point. Because I would like to go to the movies again. Realistically, I couldn't even tell you the last time I was at a movie. I think it was when I saw the first It, and that was like 9 years ago. Like, I just don't go.
No way. You haven't been to the
movies? They don't do it for
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa.
I couldn't tell you the last movie I've been to. Maybe it's probably something shorter than that. I don't know. Maybe 5 years. I just never go. I got a big TV at home. Why would I go? It doesn't make sense to me. All right. We're going to take a break here, gang. When we're back, Nolan and I are going to be diving into some Bitcoin history. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV news coming your way in just a bit. Back to Roxom TV news. Currently, the Bitcoin price is shooting up this morning as they are back over $97,000 per Bitcoin. And that brings us to our top Bitcoin story of this hour. And it's a look back at Bitcoin's history. You see, 10 years ago today, Joseph Poon and Thaddeus Drija published what became known as the Lightning Network white paper. Now, at the time, it proposed a bold idea. Instead of forcing every Bitcoin transaction onto the base layer, users could open payment channels off-chain, transact instantly, and then settle later. The goal was simple but ambitious. Make Bitcoin fast, make it cheap, and make it usable for everyday payments. What began as a theoretical roadmap has since grown into one of Bitcoin's most successful real-world experiments. You see, over the last decade, Lightning has evolved from a niche protocol into a global payment layer. Its network capacity surged repeatedly, hitting record highs in late 2025 with more than 5,600 Bitcoin locked into Lightning channels, signaling rising liquidity and long-term confidence in the system. But capacity alone doesn't tell the full story here. What matters is the usage. You see, by 2025, merchant payments over Lightning had grown significantly. And in some data sets, Lightning accounted for roughly 15% of all Bitcoin payments. That is not hype. That, my friends, is behavior. And some of the most meaningful milestones aren't technical at all. In fact, they're cultural. In 2025, Steak and Shake, a major U.S. restaurant chain, began accepting Bitcoin via Lightning at all of its locations, allowing customers to pay instantly with near zero fees. Now, around the same time, Jack Dorsey's Square started rolling out native Bitcoin payments powered by Lightning, bringing Bitcoin payments to millions of merchants. Now, that move reframed Bitcoin not as an investment, but as a tool. From a quiet white paper to real-world commerce, Lightning's story is about infrastructure catching up to imagination. It shows that Bitcoin's evolution doesn't always come from dramatic upgrades. Sometimes it comes from patient engineering, slow adoption, and systems that quietly start working better than what came before it. 10 years later, Lightning is no longer a thought experiment, it's a functioning network. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, for people watching at home, why was the Lightning white paper such a big deal at the time, and what problem was it trying to solve that Bitcoin couldn't solve on its own?
So let's go back in time very quickly. One of the frameworks I use to predict where Bitcoin is going and describe where we've been is the human capital migration into Bitcoin. So by that, I mean the original Bitcoiners were cypherpunks on the mailing list. They were cryptographers. There were people who wanted cryptographically based money. After that, you started to get the political people, the Ron Paul people from the 2012 campaign. But for the most part, Bitcoin was dominated in those first years, 2016 and earlier, just by the computer science, computer engineering, cryptographically, people understood cryptography by these folks. It was an engineering project first. It was an engineering platform first. Even the idea of crypto economics is a subcategory of not economics. It's economics like you and I all understand. Do I do this? Choices, personal choices, all that. But it's really a subcategory of engineering, of systems design. So the engineers were the really vital human capital at the time. So if you fill a room with engineers, they're going to talk about engineering problems. And we did understand that Bitcoin had a scaling limitation. If we were going to do everything we said philosophically, the political people had brought a lot of the philosophy along with them. And it was about managing and balancing what the political people were saying had to happen, separate money and state, do all these things. The Wall Street people haven't really showed up yet. You've got political people and engineering people. So it's the reconciliation of politics as well as engineering. And it came out in fights, it came out in online debates, and it came out with all kinds of scaling plans. And what these guys offered was exactly that. There was many ways that we understood Bitcoin could scale, and these guys were the first to offer one that didn't involve miners, that didn't involve forks, that didn't involve risky business when it came to changing Bitcoin, which is exactly what the cryptographers want. Cryptographers are not the same as Silicon Valley fail fast and break things folks. They're about being slow, deliberate, and fixing things and making sure they don't break. Now, the reason why it's tough when you think about the understanding the history is because 2017, a year after Lightning started, is really when you get the Wall Street version, the Wall Street human capital comes, the business people. And I remember in the summer of 2017, when we started doing Wall Street-like Bitcoin events, Wall Street-like content, I remember calling the original Wall Street guys, and they would say to me, "I'm not a computer scientist. I don't know about any of this stuff." And I said, "That's perfect. We're trying to advance and go into the people coming from Wall Street." So what you're seeing now with the consumer level is exactly that. It's all about the professional people that enter Bitcoin. And every time you see someone leave a professional system that's working, just like the cryptographers were first, the Ron Paul people were real political operatives. They were professionals who earned money doing what they did, and they went into Bitcoin. Wall Street coming around in 2017 was the same. These were real Wall Street people. They got involved to make money. Now you're seeing folks like Steak and Shake or whatever that are really deploying these systems. So it is about predicting how the human capital migration is coming into the Bitcoin sphere, how the companies migrating there come into this consumer mentality, consumer economic mentality. So in the sediment, when you look at the archaeology of Bitcoin, the Lightning paper was the culmination, the answer to all of these. It's why there wasn't a lot of scaling debates after. The big block debate happened 1 year after the Lightning, but it's the reason why small blockers were able to hold steady and say Lightning is going to solve these problems, and they were proven right. You didn't need the hard fork. You didn't need the big blocks to be able to have these transactions. So they were proven right over time. So it was from the era when engineers dominated Bitcoin, more than the Wall Street people, more than the consumer, more than the culture. The engineers dominated it. And this was the big solution to the engineering conundrum that caught everyone up in these debates, in scaling and all that stuff, and set the stage for everything else that came after. So a huge day because it reconciled a whole human capital element that came to Bitcoin and sort of allowed everything to get built after that.
And you know, Nolan, we've come quite a long way with Lightning. I think it said in the story, it's like 15% of all Bitcoin transactions last year were over Lightning. So it does like beg the question, like, how do you think Bitcoin or Lightning changes what Bitcoin is to the average person over time? Not necessarily as an investment, but as money. Like, what's that change going to be like, you think?
Well, it allows us to do exactly what we saw from Steak and Shake, which is off the shelf, white label adoption of the technology. It took them a couple of memes, put some on their balance sheet, and within months, every store is taking Bitcoin. It took them no time at all. That's one of the advantages of Bitcoin and this decentralization of technology. So weirdly, it's offering consumer technology to people to consume, but it's using the opposite of consumer technology. So open sourced, robust architecture, not fail fast and break things. So that was the fight around the big blockers, right? The big blockers and the small blockers back then were the engineers versus the consumer facing applications. The consumer facing applications would have been the Coinbase at the time. You know, Brian Armstrong was a big blocker, and a lot of Bitcoiners never forgave him for that, of course, right? Because the consumer application was the predicate for the big blockers. They said, if we're not going to solve the consumer's problem, we're just a science project. The engineers were saying, we're not going to be a science project, but we have to choose this slow and steady path to get to consumer adoption, so that a Steak and Shake can come around and actually just use this open source technology, take it off the shelf the way they did, answered the original worries and warnings that the consumer tech-oriented Bitcoin startups like Coinbase had back in 2017, the reason for which they adopted their support of big block technology. And I can even tell you a funny story. I remember Joseph Poon running into the room that I was in while we were covering, because we hosted the event where the New York Agreement, the famous New York Agreement, was signed, which was all these commercial applications getting together saying, we want big blocks. We're, you know, more or less firing the core devs and all this stuff. And Joseph Poon ran into our room and said, this is an atrocity, this is crazy. And making sure that, you know, because it was weirdly our owner at CoinDesk that was leading the New York Agreement, so we had to find a way to cover it that was journalistically had integrity. And so Joseph Poon, right away, we got him on, you know, he got his quotes and everything like that, and covered it straight down the middle and just said, you know, this is what happened, where, who, what, where, when, why. And we made sure from then on, all summer long, every day, we covered an article that was both for and against. We never let one article go out without a rebuttal. And we actually, you know, really, CoinDesk wouldn't be surviving today had it just followed the consumer technology argument, because we did back up into these journalistic principles, because the author of the Bitcoin Lightning paper literally came in person to the newsroom and said, you know, don't make this mistake. It's how we were able to navigate the user-activated soft fork movement with credibility, not antagonism. And so, you know, I thought that was one of the highest moments in Bitcoin journalism, and the legacy lives today. And you know, that whole fight of what the problem was able to solve, it was able to answer the problem for those consumer-facing applications and give them an alternative that wasn't big blocks, that's allowed those two communities of engineers, political people, and products and services and markets people to all still coalesce on Bitcoin and move forward.
Very good. Well, I got to tell you, one of my highest moments every day, Nolan, is getting the opportunity to chat with you on the show every morning. It's my favorite, and I know our audience agrees. So I wanted to thank you for dropping in as you do and sharing your insight and expertise with us. It's always the best. I appreciate it. I know everyone else at home does too. I wish you and yours a happy Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, Hank. See you later. See you tomorrow, my man.
Thanks, Dylan. Pleasure is all mine. See you tomorrow. All right, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to be with more of the day's top stories on our second hour of the show, including the U.S. grocery chain that is now tracking your face, your eyes, and your voice. Great. We'll be right back. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Now, before we get into our second hour of this morning's program, here's a quick recap of the top stories we covered during the first hour of today's show. Denmark and Greenland are meeting with U.S. officials as tensions rise over Trump's comments about acquiring Greenland, even as new polling shows only 17% of Americans support the idea. We also looked at the House Oversight Committee's move to potentially hold former President Bill Clinton in contempt over his refusal to testify in the Epstein investigation. And we covered Netflix's consideration of an all-cash bid to push through its Warner Brothers deal, a move that could reshape the entire entertainment industry. Now to our top story of this hour. Guys, let's roll a stinger. Welcome back. So this next story begins in Iran, but its consequences are now radiating far beyond the country's borders. You see, protests continue across the country, and now the United States is withdrawing some personnel from the key regional bases as a precaution. Now, this is according to a U.S. official speaking to Reuters, and that follows remarks by a senior Iranian official warning neighbors hosting U.S. troops that they would be targeted if Washington launches strikes. Nationwide protests have now entered their third week, and according to activist groups, more than 2,500 people have been killed and over 18,000 have been detained. One user posted video of the unrest on X. Take a look. Now, Iranian state media says security forces are responding to what it calls riots driven by foreign-backed agitators. Protesters, however, frame the movement as an existential challenge to clerical rule. And now, the unrest is colliding with international geopolitics. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is urging Iranians to keep protesting. He has said help is on its way and warned of very strong action against the Iranian government. Here's more on what he said.
Americans woke up this morning and they saw that you said help is on the way.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of help on the way and in different forms, including economic help from our standpoint, and not going to help Iran very much. And, you know, we put Iran out of business with their nuclear capacity, and now, depending on what's actually happening, nobody's been able to give us accurate numbers about how many people they've killed.
Well, on that
but
point,
it looks
Mr.
like
President,
it could be a pretty substantial number, and that's going to be a lot of problems for them.
a lot of problems. On that point, you did say the U.S. would get involved if Iran started killing protesters.
Yeah.
They have,
Yeah.
by the many thousands, according to reports.
Well, we'll see what that is. I've heard two numbers, but we'll see what that is.
Well, now we're hearing that they're going to start hanging protesters tomorrow. So it comes back to the question, have they crossed your red line, or has the line moved?
I haven't heard about the hanging. If they hang them, you're going to see some things that I don't know what where you come from and what your thought process is, but you'll perhaps be very happy.
What do you mean by that?
We will take very strong action. If they do such a thing, we will take very strong action.
First of all, where were they conducting that interview? It looked like an empty chemical plant or something. But back to the story. Iranian officials say direct contacts between Tehran and Washington have been suspended, and state media reports that Iran's security leadership has reached out to regional governments in an effort to deter any U.S.-led intervention. Inside Iran, pro-government rallies have been staged in major cities, signaling that the security forces remain loyal and cohesive, a factor analysts say has helped the regime survive past protest waves. Now, the crackdown from the government in Iran has not only been physical, it has also been digital. You see, the shutdown has cut off millions of Iranians from messaging apps, social media, and independent news. Now, this is a tactic authorities have repeatedly used during past unrest to disrupt coordination and limit the spread of protest footage. But this time, it has gone a step further. You see, Tehran briefly shut down parts of its own national information network, crippling banks, ATMs, fuel payments, and even government websites before selectively restoring essential services. Into that vacuum stepped Elon Musk's SpaceX. You see, Starlink is now offering free satellite internet access inside Iran. Since then, activists have quietly smuggled Starlink terminals. Iranian authorities have responded by trying to jam Starlink signals and seize equipment. Analysts say this standoff highlights how internet access has become a strategic front in modern unrest. Control the network, and you shape the narrative. Now, while Starlink has not completely pierced Iran's blackout, it has allowed a steady trickle of videos and eyewitnesses' accounts to reach the outside world, more than authorities likely intended. Now, is Iran actually on the brink of collapse? Well, despite the scale and brutality of the crackdown, many analysts believe the answer is no, at least not yet. BBC Middle East correspondent Jeremy Bowen argues that while Iran is facing one of its deepest crises in decades, authoritarian systems often decay gradually and then suddenly. And for now, Iran appears to be in the gradual phase. The decisive factor is the continued loyalty of the security forces. Iran has spent decades building a vast internal coercive apparatus centered on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its auxiliary Bajdi militia. These forces have obeyed orders to use live fire against protesters, demonstrating that the regime still holds its most critical asset, a security structure willing and able to suppress dissent at scale. Now, without a split in those forces, analysts say protest movements struggle to convert mass anger into political change. This unrest is also creating a major problem for China. You see, Iran has quietly become one of China's most important strategic partners, and the current instability now exposes Beijing on multiple fronts all at once. You see, China is by far the largest buyer of Iranian oil. In 2025, Beijing imported an average of 1.38 million barrels per day of Iranian crude, accounting for roughly 12% of its total oil imports. Now, much of that oil moves through opaque trading channels designed to avoid U.S. sanctions. Any prolonged instability or a U.S.-backed political shift threatens to disrupt that flow and complicate China's energy security. And beyond oil, Iran plays a critical role in China's long-term infrastructure ambitions. You see, the two countries launched a direct rail link last year that cuts transit time between China and the Middle East and Europe to roughly 15 days compared to about 40 by sea. Iran is also a major node in China's Belt and Road Initiative, where Beijing has pledged up to $400 billion in investment over the next 25 years. Now, political upheaval now threatens those very plans. The unrest also collides with China's diplomatic positioning. Beijing has tried to present itself as a stabilizing force in the Middle East, even brokering a surprise rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. A destabilized Iran undermines that narrative and risks forcing China into uncomfortable choices between protecting its interests and avoiding confrontation with Washington. Now, analysts say that Iran matters far more to China's global strategy than places like Venezuela, where Beijing has already absorbed heavy losses. This has become a fragile balancing act. China wants stability without endorsing repression, energy without retaliation, and influence without entanglement. And as the unrest drags on, that balance is becoming harder and harder to maintain. Now, at the core of this crisis is money, right? More specifically, the collapse of it. You see, Iran's nationwide protests are tightly intertwined with the collapse of the rial, which has acted as both the trigger and the accelerant. Now, the currency lost nearly half of its value last year and hit record lows in recent weeks. That sudden plunge drove up prices for food, fuel, rent, and medicine. It transformed long-standing frustration into daily emergency. Inflation has surged past 40%, wiping out savings and making even routine expenses unpredictable. And this has fueled anger, not just at sanctions, but at domestic mismanagement, corruption, and the perception that elites remain insulated from the pain. Economic grievances have unified people across class and geography, and the ripple effects are now crossing borders. Now, the weaker rial has sharply reduced Iranian travel abroad, hitting neighboring economies like Iraq, where cities dependent on religious tourism have seen pilgrim numbers collapse. And businesses have closed, jobs have disappeared, and the crisis is no longer contained. All right, I want to give you my quick take on this one, because here's what's really standing out to me about all of this. This isn't just another protest wave, and it's not just another authoritarian crackdown. What's happening in Iran right now is a collision between three things that usually don't unravel at the same time: public belief in the system, the value of money, and the government's ability to control the story people tell about what's real. Now, authoritarian governments can survive by being unpopular, they can survive sanctions, and they can even survive international isolation for a long time. What they struggle with is when people stop believing in the system, can no longer afford daily life, and start realizing that the official version of reality doesn't match what they're living all at once. That's why the internet blackout matters so much here. This isn't only about stopping protesters from organizing. It's about stopping the outside world from seeing what's actually happening and stopping people inside the country from feeling like they're being witnessed. Because once the world sees something clearly, it's hard to pretend it isn't happening. And once people inside a country know the world is watching, fear doesn't disappear, but it does change. And what makes this moment dangerous isn't that collapse is inevitable. It's that time itself is no longer neutral. Every death adds memory, every blackout adds resentment, and every threat raises the stakes. Iran's leadership is betting it can outlast this moment. The protesters are betting the moment can outlast the regime. And the rest of the world is quietly hoping neither bet becomes its problem. History suggests that it usually does, because when a country this large, this strategic, and this interconnected starts to come apart, it rarely does so quietly, and it almost never stays contained. All right, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to be joined in just a bit by our special guest of our second hour to talk more of the hour's top stories. So stay tuned. We'll be back in action right after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Now, our next story is unfolding in New York City, where grocery shopping is starting to look a little more like airport security. You see, if you walk into a Wegmans in Manhattan or Brooklyn, your groceries are no longer the only thing being scanned. Your face, your eyes, and potentially even your voice may now be part of the store's security system. Wegmans has begun collecting and storing biometric data from shoppers, including facial images, eye scans, and voice data, saying the technology is meant to protect the safety of customers and employees. But privacy advocates say this represents a major escalation in how much personal information private companies are allowed to collect without meaningful oversight. Now, this move expands on a pilot program that Wegmans launched back in 2024. At the time, the company said the system mostly applied to employees and promised to delete any biometric data collected from customers. That promise is no longer being made. The new signage does not explain how long this data will be stored, who can access it, or whether it could be shared with law enforcement or federal agencies. And that lack of clarity is what's making people nervous. Unlike a password, biometric data cannot be reset. If your face print or voice print is compromised, it's compromised permanently. And privacy groups warn this could be especially chilling for immigrant communities where fears of surveillance are already very high. And several customers told Gothamist they plan to avoid Wegmans altogether because of the policy. Now, New York City technically requires businesses using biometric systems to post notices, but enforcement is limited. A city council bill introduced in 2023 to restrict biometric surveillance by private companies stalled. So for now, businesses are largely free to expand these systems on their own terms. Other grocery chains in the city already use similar technology, though no one really knows how widespread it has become. For people watching at home, this matters because biometric surveillance rarely shrinks once it becomes normalized. It spreads quietly from stores to offices to apartment buildings to everyday life. And the more places that collect this data, the more valuable and vulnerable it becomes. This is not about whether Wegmans has good intentions. It's about whether permanent identity databases should be built into daily life without clear limits, transparency, or explicit consent. All right, joining us for our second hour to talk about this story and others, we have the founder of Zeus, Evan Kaludis. Evan, welcome to the show. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on the program. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're super pumped to have you. And I want to get your thoughts. What are your first thoughts about this story? We have Wegmans Supermarket in New York is going to be collecting biometric data of customers. Seems like a bit of an overreach. What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, that's an understatement, I'd say. This one really hits close to home. As someone born in New York, someone who actually really likes Wegmans, it's just really unfortunate to see. So obviously, relative to a lot of the country, New York has a relative high crime rate, and that's sort of used as the justification here. But I really think the underlying reason why they're doing this is actually a little bit more pernicious, a little bit more malicious. And I really think that this is going to be a system that's abused. Data is going to be collected and ultimately sold to third parties. Whether that be advertisers, people trying to take advantage of, your identity, link it to your credit card, especially if you're paying with credit card in the store. Or perhaps even states, especially seeing all this activity in the United States pertaining to ICE and Homeland Security. Yes, definitely a terrible precedent to set.
Yeah, I've seen the movie Minority Report, so I'm pretty sure I know how this whole thing works out. And Wegmans, to your point, said that this is about safety, but privacy advocates say it's a major escalation. So my question to you, Evan, is where is the line between convenience and surveillance starting to blur here?
I mean, it's massive. I mean, do customers actually see convenience from these programs? Not really. It's not as if they're creating these, cashierless, walkout stations, sort of like Amazon was experimenting with. You'll see these at like airports where you go in, you take something off the shelf and you leave without having to go to a cashier because they track everything. It doesn't seem like they have any indication of even doing something like that. So where's the convenience that's being added to this? This seems like pure surveillance play, and I see it as no different than, companies pushing their customers to using apps where they could collect their data and ultimately sell it to third parties to improve their bottom lines. So ultimately, the only thing that consumers can do is to boycott these stores and go to local stores that don't have such policies. It'll be interesting to see if they plainly write their policies around how the data is stored, policies for sharing it, actually see how it's enforced in practice. But I'm not optimistic for a good output here.
Yeah, you mentioned about how this data is stored, and that's a really interesting point, because I'd be curious from like a cybersecurity perspective, how dangerous is it to centralize permanent identifiers like people's faces and voices into private databases that people aren't able to opt out of or reset? Again, that seems problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in today's age of AI, where AI is proliferating at such a great rate. Even on the consumer side, we're seeing AI so cheap, accessible, able to get us great results, even in our own enterprise, doing coding, code review, stuff like that. I can only imagine some of the nightmares these systems can help, build. It's really scary. You don't know where the data is going. You don't know how long it's being stored for, how it's being stored. We really can't be depending on these companies to be handling this data in a responsible manner.
Yeah. And really quick, Evan, as someone who's built tools around self-custody and sovereignty, How does this kind of biometric normalization move society? Does it move society in kind of the opposite direction? And what does it train people to kind of accept over time?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's like the frog in the pot. You know, you could slowly ramp up the temperature in the pot, and the frog is going to stay in there and get boiled. But if you go to 100 right away, the frog's going to just jump out. So I think we're just really conditioned to accept things as long as they're done slowly, piecemeal. And you know, the other like real pernicious thing about this is the ability for private companies like this to collude with the state. The state really benefits the most when these sort of things are carried out by private enterprise to help them accomplish their long-term goals. Whether it be something like enforcement of COVID protocols that we saw during lockdowns to surveillance in this manner. It's just so much easier to kick it off to private enterprise.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I don't like it either. I'll be curious to how this continues to play out, if we are just going to get comfortable in kind of the cooking pot, like you said, or if that temperature is going to get spiked up to a certain degree where people actually start feeling this and, you know, going against us a little more than we're seeing right now. It'll be interesting to play out. We'll check it out. We're going to move on to our Bitcoin story. Oh, we got more? Please, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just hoping they don't roll out to my local Wegmans. That would be...
yeah, I know. You love your Wegmans.
Love my Wegmans.
I get it. I got my favorites too. If they put biometric scanning in there, that might be the end of that. But hopefully they don't. We'll see how it plays out. All right, Evan, we're going to move to our Bitcoin story of the second hour, guys. Let's roll the stinger. Welcome back. It's time for our Bitcoin story of the second hour, and Bitcoin is currently still sitting above that 97K mark. We've seen a nice bump up in price action in the last 24 hours. And over in Germany, one of the country's biggest banks has quietly made a decision that says a lot about where Bitcoin is headed. Germany's second largest bank is officially moving into Bitcoin and crypto trading, and this is not a small pilot or a branding exercise. DZ Bank has received regulatory approval to offer institutional Bitcoin and crypto trading under the European Union's MiCA framework, with the green light coming from Germany's financial regulator, BaFin. Now that means that Bitcoin is no longer sitting on the edges of Germany's financial system. If it is being plugged indirectly into the country's traditional banking infrastructure, the same rails that move capital for corporations, funds, and major institutions. This is what real adoption looks like. Not slogans or hype, but integration into the plumbing of finance. Now, what makes this moment especially striking is the contrast with Germany's recent past. You see, in 2024, the German government sold roughly 50,000 Bitcoin that had been seized in criminal proceedings, liquidating them to around the mid $50,000 range. Now, at the time, the decision generated just under $3 billion and was framed as responsible. In hindsight, though, it became one of the most expensive sovereign Bitcoin mistakes on record. Those same coins would later be worth billions more. Now, while the government exited early, Germany's largest financial institutions are stepping in. DZ Bank's approval reflects a broader institutional shift toward treating Bitcoin not as a novelty, but as a regulated financial asset. For viewers at home, this matters because this is how systemic change actually happens. Not through sudden revolutions, but through quiet normalization. And when major banks offer regulated access, Bitcoin stops being optional. It becomes part of the existing system. And once that happens, it becomes much harder to marginalize or unwind. Evan, bringing you back. First thoughts on this. Germany doing a bit of an about face. They sold all those Bitcoins about 1.5, 2 years ago. Now their second largest bank is offering crypto and Bitcoin products. What are your thoughts?
It's fantastic. I mean, first off, we wish they got it right out the gate and hadn't had sold those coins. But, you know, some people have to touch the stove, get burned before they realize the errors of their ways, you know. But overall, this is a fantastic news. In 2025, we've been having a lot of interesting discussions with banks, hedge funds, neobanks, credit unions, all interested to start getting into Bitcoin and offering up Bitcoin native offerings. And this is definitely a huge indicator of that. We're expecting a ton of more institutions to get onboarded, start offering up those native services in 2026. And yeah, we're excited to ride the wave. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be curious from your perspective, Evan, how does this change the way everyday people might start encountering Bitcoin? Does it make it feel more legitimate or maybe just more institutional? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the average person really still looks up to authorities. So if they're going to see that their bank that they've been banking with for 10, 20, 30 years is, you know, accepting and embracing this technology, then I think it's going to pique the more apprehensive people's, you know, thoughts on the technology and might make that foray. People that, you know, were tech native or willing to get into Bitcoin already, I think they have already done that at this point. So at this point, any major new influx of Bitcoin users are going to be through these sort of margins where existing traditional players are getting into the space and make the average person more comfortable with the technology. With more hand holding, right? I expect a lot of these services to be more on the custodial side. But, you know, that's naturally how a lot of this adoption is going to happen. You can't expect the vast majority of the world to hop on and write their own seed phrase down and jump right into self-custody. But what's important is that option is going to be available to them down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely, I feel like it acts as an additional on-ramp for like my Mima and Papa down back in Deutschland to actually get, you know, involved in the space a little more, because, you know, they're always like, hey, why are you promoting that internet drug money? And I was like, Mima, you don't understand. That's not what this is about. And hopefully this will legitimize it to people like that a little bit more. And going back to Germany, we mentioned briefly before that they sold those tens of thousands of Bitcoin back in 2024, and now its biggest banks are stepping in. So my question for you, Evan, is what does that say about how governments and institutions often misunderstand this asset? How are they misunderstanding Bitcoin?
I think a lot of people in government are very risk averse. You know, they're only thinking forward to, you know, the current election cycle or whatever their seat is, you know, however long that lasts. Yeah, they really don't have to take the brunt of the downside, and the upside for them is also very limited. On the upside, I'd say, hey, it's probably better that a lot of this capital is in the hands of private institutions than in the hands of the state. At least that's my preference. So that's another upside to it. But yeah, I just think people in private industry are more forward thinking and are more likely to embrace this tech. I think there's only going to be a handful of these instances like El Salvador where you see leaders really embracing it. From the top down. I really think a lot of Bitcoin adoption is really going to be bottom up instead.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And as somebody who focuses on self-custody and user sovereignty, how do you see the tension between institutional adoption and individual control kind of playing out over the next few years? I know that's been a big narrative in 2025 with all the institutions we've seen jump into the orange pool.
We just have to embrace it. I think first and foremost, if you get upset about how other people are going to be using Bitcoin, you're going to have a really bad time. So we're actually trying to burn both ends of the candle. We're going to keep working on our consumer app, make our products easy and accessible from the app stores on consumers' phones, but also try to onboard merchants and institutions to help build the Bitcoin circular economy. We think the more participants there are, the better every Bitcoin holder is going to be. So,
couldn't agree more, my friend. Absolutely. The more we get this out, and we're especially using it as a transactional thing rather than just a store of value. You know, I've been saying for a long time, I think really the biggest challenge I'm seeing for Bitcoin mass adoption right now is still kind of the UI UX thing. When we are really having Bitcoin where I can just use it like a Venmo app, like there's no reason everybody won't get on board with that. I think very shortly after. So we'll see. There's a lot of challenges ahead, but we're moving in the right direction. And from this Bitcoin story, I want to go to another one that is helping shape the current Bitcoin world, as this one is actually unfolding here in the United States, where corporate Bitcoin treasuries are starting to behave less like experiments and more like an industry. Strive, a Bitcoin treasury company, has acquired Semler Scientific. Now, this is the first time one publicly traded Bitcoin treasury company has acquired another. Shareholders approved the deal, clearing the way for what Strive calls a major step in consolidating the corporate Bitcoin treasury landscape. Now, under the terms of the agreement, Semler Scientific shareholders will receive Strive Class A shares at a fixed exchange ratio. The company says that ratio reflects a meaningful premium and aligns both firms around a single strategy centered on long-term Bitcoin accumulation. Now, this is not just a merger of businesses here. It is a merger of balance sheets, incentives, and ideology, and the numbers make that very clear. Once the transaction is fully accounted for, the combined entity is projected to hold just under 13,000 Bitcoin. That puts Strive the 11th largest Bitcoin treasury holder in the world. Now, for people watching at home, this matters because it shows how corporate Bitcoin adoption is evolving. This is no longer about companies dipping a toe into crypto to test the waters. It is about building entire business models around Bitcoin as a core financial asset. And as consolidation increases, Bitcoin treasuries may start to look more like a distinct sector of the market, one with its own leaders, playbooks, and power structures. And that could reshape how Wall Street thinks about Bitcoin, not as a trade, but as an infrastructure. Bringing Evan back. Evan, for people watching at home, what exactly is a Bitcoin treasury company, and how is that different from a company that just happens to own some Bitcoin? Could you really quick give us the difference?
Well, at the moment, I don't think there really is much of a difference. A lot of these companies are just putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. In a lot of cases, taking over zombie companies that are no longer offering up their core services, or their core services have really evolved over the years, and just hoping that they can sell shares because they're able to take advantage of Bitcoin's upside. Now, I really think that we're entering a very exciting era, this treasury company acquisition era, where the big fish are going to eat the little fish. And I think it's going to be more than just how much your allocation to Bitcoin is, but rather what kind of services you can offer around Bitcoin and what kind of return you can offer up for your shareholders. So does this include Bitcoin custody services? Does this include lending products? Or does this include more exciting stuff like actual Bitcoin native services, where these treasury companies could be deploying their capital to things like the Lightning Network or to coin pools, stuff that really helps facilitate the actual use of Bitcoin in our day-to-day lives. And I think that the Bitcoin treasury companies that are forward-thinking, deploys their capital in a Bitcoin native and forward-thinking way, are going to be the real winners here. They're going to be earning real fee revenue off of the Bitcoin that they deploy, and they're going to be able to outperform everyone who's just stuffing Bitcoin under their mattresses, their balance sheets, and treating it like cash under the mattress or a pet rock. So we're very excited to see who's the most forward-thinking, who can offer up the most value for their shareholders. And you know, it's not winner at all, but the people who aren't forward-thinking are really going to suffer. You can't just buy this thing and stuff it under your mattress anymore.
Right. I mean, that's what we saw in 2025, right? At the beginning of the year, it was the Bitcoin treasury company narrative, and you said all these companies with underlying products that weren't doing well or dying were jumping in, you know, quote unquote zombie companies. And now it's certainly looking like the winners of this are going to be the people that have the best Bitcoin stewards in place to help them navigate this new financial arena. Because like you said, holding it just isn't enough. You need to be investing and building products to help, proliferate the space and, and make it better for all of us. But there is an interesting and unique part of this story. And it's that this is the first time one publicly traded Bitcoin treasury company has acquired another. What does that signal to you about where this space is heading? You just think they're gonna, the best ones are gonna kind of be absorbing each other till we have a couple big players in the space? Or how do you see this playing out?
It's gonna be interesting to see. I think it's gonna be complicated. More players will come in. Players that aren't efficient with their use of capital are gonna get bought out or fold. There just really needs to be more substance. I really think that what we've seen in 2025 was very exciting, but for most of these companies lacked substance entirely. Especially if you're a zombie company and not offering up anything, you're not making any sales, you're just banking on people buying this instead of buying Bitcoin because, I don't know, it's more accessible through 401ks or traditional brokerages. It's a very myopic, narrow view of the future. And I think the companies that really embrace this tech and really start looking forward, not just quarter by quarter, but decade by decade, and thinking about the implications that this technology can have on society and the exciting role that their company can play in that, they're going to be the real winners. And, it can be very jarring dealing with your shareholders, dealing with your board of directors, but you don't have to go in gung-ho all the way. You could deploy money to the Lightning Network. You could start earning yield. And we've seen it's very realistic for a company just with large bags to earn 5 or 6%, even without native services. And then you can use that as a launch pad to either, loan that Bitcoin out to people who are offering up native services or launch native services yourself and start turning your yield into the double digits, which we've seen companies like Block do, or Square rather, with all the offerings that they have. It's super exciting. A new era is upon us, and tons of people are really gonna kick themselves for being on the sidelines and not embracing this new technology and entering into the new Bitcoin era.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you have a company that is doing just that. It's advancing the space and, helping solve for these problems that we're going to be experiencing in the future. And I'm excited to talk with you about that right after our break. So everybody stay tuned. We'll be back with more of Evan Kalutis and his company Zeus right after this quick commercial message. Stay tuned. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card, buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. All right, welcome back to RoxomTV News. I'm here with Evan Kalutis of Zeus. I'm bringing Evan back in. So Evan, I want to get to know a little bit more about you and your company, but let's start with you. Before Bitcoin, before Zeus, what were you doing and what eventually pulled you in to the world of Bitcoin? Tell us about it.
Oh, Hank, that's a fantastic question. I was always really into computers. I ended up doing undergrad in computer science, but Bitcoin actually popped on to my radar freshman year as something on Hacker News. I thought of it as RuneScape Gold. It really didn't click for me until I actually downloaded the software and used it. But I always knew the value of hard money. I had a crazy Uncle Savas who really would sing the praises of gold and silver and introduced me to all the Mises Institute stuff, ultimately got me into Murray Rothbard. After school, I was working in cybersecurity for 6 years. I worked at a cybersecurity startup. Wore a lot of different hats there. I did front end, back end, cloud development. I was even an analyst for some banks for a couple of years. And there I actually saw some Bitcoin and Ethereum traffic on their network. So I'm like, oh, these guys are making a play into this. And we're talking about some of the oldest banks not only in the United States, but also in the world. So that was really a big indicator that this was the future and where things were going. So yeah, after that, I went to work for Kraken for a year, where I helped them with their Lightning Gateway integration. Did some contract work at Lightning Labs, and then went full-time into Zeus, which I had been working on since I was at the cybersecurity company back in 2019. And then 2023 made the full jump. Since then, the project has really evolved. It started as a remote controller for those cypherpunk users who wanted to control their full Lightning node back at home or in the cloud. Then we built a node or full wallet into the phone itself, so you could get started with a few clicks. And we built up all our services with our Lightning service provider, which helps users get onboarded and start accepting Bitcoin Lightning payments instantly. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, and we've made so many strides over the years.
Very cool. Now, you kind of mentioned what it did. You said it was kind of like maybe more intended for cypherpunks originally, but for our audience out there that, you know, this is new to them, how would you go about explaining what it does to someone who's never heard of it before?
So Lightning Network is really the payment rails, de facto payment rails of Bitcoin. When you go to one of these new Square merchants, I believe they've enabled the option for, 400,000 merchants to opt into that system. Hell, my local coffee shop just opted in. It's fantastic. Anyway, those invoices are all over the Lightning Network. On-chain is really not conducive to payments because it can take, tens of minutes for payment to confirm, and you don't want to hold up the grocery store line with that payment. Lightning payments are cheap, basically instant. This is basically the payments rail that we're going to be using for everyday Bitcoin payments. So Zeus is a self-custodial wallet. You write down your 24-word seed phrase. You generate an invoice. You can send out of any other Lightning-enabled wallet or exchange, build up your balance there, then go off to whatever merchants that you want, either in the real world, brick and mortar, or online, and start making those instant payments and become part of the Bitcoin economy for everyday payments.
Very cool. And, I was checking it out a little bit, doing my due diligences before we had you on the show. And, I noticed that a lot of wallets out there focus on making things simpler. But Zeus kind of feels more like a bit of a power tool. Was that intentional from the beginning? Like, what was your thought process that you were like, what does Zeus do that a lot of the other wallets out there don't?
So Zeus ultimately gives you full control of the payment channels that power the Lightning Network. You're typically peered up with other peers. It's sort of like having a bar tab between your friends. It's like, oh, I got this one, you owe me 5, you owe me 10. And the Lightning Network, I'd say, is like an interconnected system of all those bar tabs. I might have a channel to you, Hank, but I don't have a channel to John, but you do, and we could move our tabs through each other. So that's the best analogy I like to use. But anyway, it started as a power user app. We were gradually moving it to be more and more friendly. So we started first as a remote controller. We built in the wallet in the phone and the LSP, Lightning Service Provider, to sort of obfuscate that channel management that could be very time consuming and technical. And now we're taking another step in adding eCash to the wallet, which is cheaper. You don't have to pay for channels out the gate. And we're calling it a graduated wallet experience. So you can start with eCash. It's going to be super easy to use. We're shooting to have the user experience of Wallet of Satoshi before it left the US market in 2023, before they came back, but with better privacy. And then as the user builds up a balance and they know that they shouldn't have it in a system like eCash because it's custodial, you could be rugged, the wallet will act as a sort of just Sherpa and say, hey, this balance is getting pretty big. We know you probably wouldn't want to lose this. Hit this button. You can upgrade. You can get a LSP, and you can become fully self-sovereign where no one else can take your money from you. You're in control of your financial destiny. So I know when I was getting into Bitcoin, it was very difficult to navigate, especially in the early days. But still, it can be very jarring, especially with all this misinformation, people trying to shill you all their different wares and altcoins. We really think it's exciting, this prospect of having your wallet be your Bitcoin Sherpa and level you up through that Bitcoin journey. Not everyone is going to become that cypherpunk who runs their own node and tries to earn routing revenue. But at the very least, we can guide someone from having just that really good UX, having that aha moment with Lightning, to self-custody. And we think this is a really unique proposition. There's no wallet really like this. And hell, we think it's a hell of a lot harder starting at a custodial wallet experience and trying to get up to the cypherpunk experience than doing it the way we did it, from building a super empowering app that cypherpunks dream of to something that your grandma could use. And that's the goal for 2026. Make something that my yaya can fire up in a Bitcoin journey. Just make it easy for her.
I can't wait. Your yaya and my Mima are going to be transacting Bitcoin soon enough with this type of thing. I love it. And I love the Bitcoin Sherpa element to it. It reminds me, you remember back in the day on Microsoft Office, they had Clippy, and he would give you like little advice about how to use the program and stuff. So it sounds kind of like a reinvention of Clippy, which I'm all about.
We've actually been toying around with the idea. With Greek mythology and the branding, we have such a a breadth of characters to dive into and help make the experience fun, make a great user experience, have people feel empowered when they make those payments, but also make it very friendly and warm. So we'll see what characters we dive into this year.
I love that. I love that. And I mentioned earlier. Go ahead, please.
Oh no, I'm just saying. Who's going to be there? Who's the Clippy of Greek mythology? We'll have to figure that out. But got a couple ideas.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure there's some out there. And we talked about, and I mentioned earlier, I think like the UX UI thing is of paramount importance for mass Bitcoin adoption. And you mentioned that that's something you and the team have really been working on and making that experience more friendly to the average user. So my question for you is, like, right now, who is Zeus really for, and who do you want it to be for in the future? Is it kind of trending that way where eventually it'll be simple enough for everybody? But where are you right now?
Right now, I'd say it's perfect for people who have already been in Bitcoin and are comfortable self-custodying. They don't mind spending a little bit of money to get a channel from our Lightning service provider, or they like fiddling with their channels, picking their peers out, opening up channels with their friends and other people on the Lightning network. But yes, we want Zeus to really be the recommended wallet for everyone trying to use Bitcoin as an everyday payment method, as everyday money. And we think we're well on our way on getting there, and it's gonna work is well underway. We're hoping to get prototype of the wallet into people's hands. Maybe end of Q1.
Heck yeah. Well, that's amazing. And, I'm sure, like, just listening to this, I know I'm really interested in learning more about Zeus, what the wallet's capabilities are. So that means there are definitely people in our audience today that are wondering the same. So for anyone out there who's interested in getting more information about Zeus, and maybe even you, they like the cut of your jib, they like what you've been saying, what's the best place I can send them to learn more about Zeus and what you're up to? Maybe you have an X account or something they can follow?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a website at ZeusLN.com. There you can learn all about our wallet, our LSP. We also have a section for businesses, as we have a B2B part of the business. And we're trying, as I said earlier, we're trying to burn down both sides of the candle, bring on consumers, but also bring on merchants and institutions. So check that out. We call that product Zeus White. But we're also on X. You can follow us at ZeusLN on X, and at my name for my personal account at Evan Kaludis on X. But we really like Nostr too, so give us a search over there and check us out. It's all linked on the website.
Well, end of Q1, it sounds like we got some exciting stuff happening in the Zeus world in the not too distant future. So when you have that released, you'll have to come back on so we can make sure the world knows about it. Super exciting times. And it was super great having you on the show, Evan. I really appreciate your insight into the space and your angle of, from your seat at the Bitcoin table. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure. And we'll have to have you back on real soon, my friend. It's exciting stuff going on over there.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege. I'd love to come back and talk to you soon.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Evan. Really appreciate your time today and enjoy the rest of your week, bud.
Cheers, you too.
Cheers. All right, gang. Well, that is a wrap for our Wednesday edition here at Roxom TV News. As always, thank you so much for tuning in with us. It means the world. We're here at 5 in the morning just so we can bring you the most up-to-date news that's going on in the world and the world of Bitcoin. And there's a whole team behind this, so it is certainly more than a one-man job. It's like 50 or something. So thank you for that. And if you haven't already, we would certainly love if you did us the kind favor of making sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV on all platforms you choose to do your doom scrolling on. And we'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, as we continue on with this new week of news. So as always, everybody, thank you for watching and tuning in, and we will see you boys and girls tomorrow for more. Enjoy the rest of your day.